So, very interesting poll out this week on the question of the national divorce. Interestingly, this was polled by some group within the University of Virginia, which believes in Charlottesville. And the focus of this group is actually on trying to research ways to, bring the country together and promote American unity, which makes this result gosh, it's hard to say whether their bias is going to be towards saying that people want this to happen or that they don't want it to happen. Because on the one hand, it sort of is an advantage to this group to say, hey, more people want to split up the country, and that's why you need to fund our program so that we can come up with ways to unify the country. And, we're justifying our own existence by saying, hey, over half of Trump supporters want to split the country in two, and 40-something%, I believe, of Biden voters also want to do the same. That just shows how important our work is, so please give us money. But on the other hand, if their goal is actually to unify the country and they have sort of an optimistic bias in that direction, this result would be quite credible, because you would think, well, maybe they would understate this result, if anything, because it's a result that they don't want. Frankly, I'm split. I don't know which way their bias is going to go when it comes to the poll, and frankly, I don't know about the quality of the poll itself. But with that said, the best I can do is analyze what they found. And that was, as I said, a majority of Trump supporters want to split the country in half. Would that shock me at this point? No, not really. Whatever the number is of people in America who are comfortable with the idea of a national divorce, whatever that number is growing. Previous polls we saw showed that 66% of Southern Republicans wanted to break the country apart, and overall nationally, I think the number might have been in the 40s, or maybe it was the high 30s. I covered that here a while back when that poll came out, but from the time that poll was taken to now, I would imagine the number would either have stayed the same or gone up. And it doesn't really matter that much what the number is nationally, because you only, when you're talking about secession, this is a matter of regionalism. So what matters more is, how many people in certain clusters believe that there should be a national divorce. But then again, it wouldn't hurt to have a broad consensus across the country if it is sort of even everywhere, that people agree across the 50 states that Americans should go their separate ways and continue their existence as at least two countries, if not 4 or even 50. Now, additionally, the fact that this percentage is growing, and that this idea is becoming more mainstream, and that it's becoming something that at least people can talk about. You're hearing, it was very heartening for me. I don't know if I specifically talked about this on this channel, but to me it was quite heartening to see a very mainstream, boilerplate liberal celebrity like Sarah Silverman bring up this idea, because that means that this is something that you're allowed to say, which is huge. This has been something that's been totally unthinkable since Reconstruction. You're not supposed to talk about secession. That's evil. Racism. It means you love slavery. But here we have a good liberal Sarah Silverman talking about secession, and nobody's going to accuse her of supporting slavery. Never would I have thought that back in, I think it was 2015, when I read Michael Malice's piece in the New York Observer entitled, "It's Time for America to Break Up," or something. This is where the language for the national divorce, that's where I first remember hearing it. And it's such a great term because it has transcended that old dichotomy of North and South and Civil War language. Malice has done a great job promoting new verbiage to describe this very old idea, which, in my opinion, at least what I've thought for the past 5 years or so, is the best solution to our current political predicament. Not everyone agrees in the world. People are different. People have different values and different views. And that's okay. And America, like the world, is a place full of people with, very divergent opinions. And nobody is going to be able to impose their will on, 350 million other people in this country. And so that means that no matter who's in power, you're going to have a huge portion of the population that is quite discontent, and doesn't really have any real recourse other than to vote harder next time and hope that they can, put the other side in their place politically and make them feel oppressed and occupied. Whereas in the national divorce scenario, everyone wins. Sure, the people who are political minorities within whichever side of the line they end up on, whichever side of the Neo-Mason-Dixon line they end up on, sure, they would be unhappy, but they would be ideally a small minority of each of the two countries, rather than a substantial and near majority of the existing single country. Additionally, people in the current United States, they have limited recourse when they have political issues with their government. Sure, if their problems are with the state government, they can move to another state, but if their problem is with the federal government, there's really nowhere they can go. And what the national divorce process would allow for is a transition period in which people could migrate if they so choose, if they really are passionate about their politics and they have a strong disagreement with the prevailing side, which controls their government, whichever side of the line they end up on. They could have a time where they could freely migrate over to the other side and live in a utopia where they are governed only by people, who generally agree with them to a certain extent, because, you can't have a democratic system where you have people with, radically opposing worldviews and ideas about society vying for power. You need an Overton window of sorts in order for democracy to really work well. And of course, in my opinion, democracy never really works that well anyway. It's way overrated. But if you want it to work better than it does now, you need people who generally agree, who generally have the same goals, but might have different ideas about what the best way to implement those ideas, or those goals, how to best to achieve those goals. That's the kind of political differences that, democracy is more capable of adjudicating. In the American context, you would kind of think of it as if we went from, the primary elections just being the general election. If you have a side that is totally dominated by either, today's Republicans or today's Democrats, and I think we would have different political factions. If things, truly split apart, we would have, political institutions would, reform and look a bit different. But if you want to try and imagine what it would be like, let's say you have Red America and Blue America, the elections would be, hey, who's going to be the best guy to lead Red America? Who's the most, conservative or populist guy? Who's the best right-winger? That's what the elections would be about, kind of like primaries are now. And on the blue side, same story. Hey, who's the best progressive? Is it going to be, Nancy Pelosi, or is it going to be AOC? And no, I don't think that people like, Nancy Pelosi or AOC would necessarily even be involved in that, but those are just examples from, today's government. And so you at least have people who are, who would be nominally, trying to achieve the same goals, who have somewhat common interests, even if they, they diverge in their ideas about implementing them and, what strategies they want to pursue. And so when you explain things to people that way, this is really a common sense solution. Sure, you can have your naysayers who, want to bring up kind of stupid objections, although there are some serious objections too. But those objections, can be settled. We have precedent for this. The Soviet Union broke apart peacefully. They found ways to resolve their differences. Czechoslovakia broke apart peacefully. Frankly, we could also look at the example of the British Empire. Britain detached itself from its colonies. It had to be done. It was bankrupt. It was way too indebted from the world wars. It could not go on being the world power that it had been. And so it merely let its colonies go. Now, if you take down the specifics, are there a lot of troubling details about decolonization and all that? Yes. But the point is, it can be done. Things like nuclear weapons, that can be negotiated away. U.S. states could put them in they could form some kind of defense alliance if they wanted to. Every U.S. state, or the successor states, could just join NATO if they wanted, or something like that, to where they would be military allies anyway, and it wouldn't really make a difference. As far as the national debt goes, frankly, there's no way to resolve that other than defaulting. I don't think there's any real serious way of paying down the national debt. Nobody really believes that. And these successor states would have their own money anyway that would not be the US dollar. I mean, maybe whatever rump state was left over after half the country breaks off, maybe that half would continue the same institutions. Maybe the Federal Reserve would continue to operate within whatever America it found itself within, probably blue America, because I don't think DC is going to the Republicans. And then maybe, I wouldn't like this, but maybe in all likelihood, you would see red America start its own central bank, and have its own red dollars, and all of the half of the federal debt would be converted into that new currency, something along those lines. There would have to be a restructuring of some sort. Frankly, I think it would result in just a plain old default. And there's lots and lots of issues like this, but at the end of the day, the benefits much outweigh the costs. These would be growing pains. It would be painful in the short term, but not as painful as it would be to continue this current political regime on indefinitely into the future. So, with that said, I will continue monitoring this trend. Obviously, I think it is it's the only real path forward to where, things can get better in this country. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.